18,000 and 9,000 square feet respectively, and associated parking, stormwater management, and utility infrastructure located at 1372 Route 3A. At the same time, we're going to be talking about application 409-24, Jerica Properties LLC, wetland conditional use permit for 3,450 square feet of wetland buffer impact for grading, pavement, and septic system located at 1372 Route 3A. You're up.
This board grew.
We did. That's why we took another picture. We had a few people missing last time.
So I'm Amy Sanders with Weston O'Neill. I'm a civil engineer on the project. To my left is Luke Hurley. He's a wetland scientist. So there was a site walk, I understand, that was held on December 14th. There were several members of the Conservation Commission that were in attendance. When they were walking the property, they did find some standing water and questioned whether it was a wetland. On Monday this week, Luke, the wetland scientist, went out to the site to review that wet area and determined that it is not wet as it didn't meet the vegetation in the soils, and questions should be directed towards Luke regarding any of this information about the wetland. And this is the wetland that was in the southeast corner of the property. If we were asking for a reduction to the septic system for the buffer, because it's no longer wet, we're going to omit that. We don't need that anymore. I'll also comment on the engineer's review. He asked us to add the sizes of the wetlands to the plan. When I reviewed that, it looked like the northern wetland is greater than 1/4 of an acre, but the southern wetland closer to the PF&H easement is less than 1/4 of an acre. Therefore, that reduction or buffer was reduced to 30 feet instead of 50 feet. So we no longer need a CUP for that buffer. There was just this tiny little bit that was extending into the previous buffer, but we don't need that one anymore. I will also point out that I did mistakenly misrepresent that the Natural Heritage Bureau letter has no species of concern. That was incorrect on my part. I apologize for that. So there are species of concern. We are compiling the FIS 1000 materials. We're going to submit that to New Hampshire Fish and Game, and we will go through the process. Luke, who is also a wildlife biologist,
Still there.
yep, is going to complete that wetland wildlife assessment. So we'll coordinate with New Hampshire Fish and Game as we're required to for the alteration of terrain permit. We received comments from alteration of terrain. I've addressed most of them. You had a question about groundwater monitoring. That is required when there is over 5,000 cubic yards of blasting materials. So the applicant is working with entity to create that groundwater management plan that's going to be submitted, and it needs to be done prior to the alteration of terrain granting the permit. So that will be taken care of as well. I went through most of the engineering comments. Most of them were clarifications or just wanting more detail on some of the construction details. I did not see anything that would alter the layout, the drainage design. It was just like clarify this on the plan, which I think is very helpful. And we'll take care of those comments as well and respond to Carrie. The one part of the comments from the engineer that we did have concerns about is the restoration bond. I did have a conversation with the review engineer, and it was suggested that if we can provide additional backup as to the unit prices for some of the items that he had listed, and I know he used the DOT weighted average. I've used the DOT weighted average when I've created estimates. It varies wildly. So I'm going to we're going to work through that process and then come back to the board with whatever revision, if any, to present it to you for your consideration. I also submitted to Carrie the monument waiver for the the rear property line along 93. It's 598-ish feet. The maximum distance between monuments is 500 feet, so we're just asking for a little relief so that we're not putting another monument along that line.
And that line is right along the interstate.
Correct. Yep. So I think those are the main highlights that I want to come back to the board with. We are again looking for relief on the northwest corner of the property for wetland buffer. So just trying to gain some feedback as to what the board feels about that.
Was the wetland, do you have a plan or map that shows the wetland boundary entirely to demonstrate that it's less than 1/4 of an acre?
No, I don't, because it is on someone else's property. But based on the contours that are there, it generally looks like it would kind of close itself on the, is it 378 contour?
Doesn't look like it really follows any particular contour.
Well, so the 378 contour kind of comes down, and I did look at, even if it were to go down, like there's kind of a ditch line that curls onto that adjacent property, but then kind of levels off, and then it goes to another high point and then goes back down. Like I took that as a whole area, and that's 7,800 square feet. 1/4 of an acre is just over 10.
So what you're saying is the only wetland buffer impact at this point is this area up in the corner here. Yeah.
And just for reference, previously, the buffer impact when it was 50 feet was a 35 square foot buffer impact. Yeah, correct.
So there's this part in this corner, and then across the top, those smaller areas are still.
Very good. Just so for scale, can you zoom in on that one left hand? What are we talking about here in terms of size?
So this whole area is 2,165 square feet of buffer impact in this pink area. And this is 670 square feet in this part of it.
And that standing water that we saw was determined not to be wetland.
I can elaborate if you need to.
Yeah, I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah.
I do understand that, a few days before we had substantial rain and rivers are high, but there was definitely plenty of water.
There was water there Monday when I went out too, so.
Yeah.
Luke Hurley, Hurley Environmental. I've got a wicked cold, so bear with me. I either whisper or I have to shout, so I'll try to keep it in the middle. I did obviously looked at everything, and when I went back out Monday, I did data plots for everything. That's what's in this packet. I looked at everything on site. I have the original wetland delineation, so I looked at everything. I said, okay, does it make it? Doesn't it make it? So that area particularly on the ledge, I think that's what's happening, because where that is, if whoever was on the sidewalk, when you're standing at it, there's a stone wall behind you. At the end of the site, it goes right up to ledge. That's what I think is happening, is there's a little bit of soil material on top of that ledge. And granted, you're right, we just had a couple inches of rain prior to. So that water is just sitting there. It's kind of seeping to the east as it's running off that, because there were some icicles that had formed. So it had a little bit of soil on top. It was making wetland soils, but as my letter report indicates, in order for it to be a jurisdictional wetland, you have to have 50% or more wetland vegetation, So you have to have 50% or more wetland vegetation, hydric soils, which are the wetland soils, and some source of hydrology, which is almost always groundwater. Comes up, changes the colors in the soils, gives enough moisture to the roots so that wetland plants grow. If there's not enough groundwater, then the wetland plants don't grow, the upland plants grow, and it's kind of balances itself out. So it did have what I was calling wetland soils, but based on the 50% or more requirement for the wetland plants, it didn't have it. It was almost entirely, and the site's really interesting. It's almost entirely all upland plants, except for in the northwest corner where that comes out of the power lines and goes down. The whole hillside and everything down is almost all upland plants. It's mostly oaks and black birch, some pines, some hemlocks, which are all upland plants. So in the data plots that I did, and I did one for that section in that area, the wetland plants, they just weren't there enough. And granted, it's winter, so a lot of the herbaceous stuff dies back. But I have my notes from the summertime when I was out there. I did all this in the summer, so I had my notes and all that information, which is also in here. It's the plant list that I had, but that I made when I was out there. So I just confirmed it when I was out on Monday. Sounds terrible because it's not coming up, but that's, yes. I went back out, I reconfirmed my data plot. And going from that low area here, as you're going up the hill, that's all upland plants up there. It looks soggy. It looks like it wants to be wet, but it's all upland vegetation. So again, I don't know what it looked like in 2007 when the original delineation was done. But there's been a lot of growth in the past 17 years, which can certainly make a difference. If something was cut. And I have it in here. It looks like it was cut between like 2003, 2006. So if the original delineation was done just after that, it's a tough one because you don't have a lot of plants and you're going by what might have been there, what's growing back now. It's a little bit easier for me because when I went out, I've had 17 years of growth and I can see all the tree species that are there now. That's the information that I use when I do my delineations and my reports. That makes sense. It's kind of a long-winded way to get through. And then also, just very quickly, on the area, the off-site wetlands down the bottom of the hill, we never really looked at that too closely before because it's off-site. I don't like to poke around somebody's backyard with my survey vest on and all that stuff. So we just, for lack of a better term, went with it and just said, all right, it's on the old plans, just go with it because I'd have to be out there for a bit digging around. Since I was asked to look at it, no pressure, I went out and I looked at it. And I dug a couple holes and it was bright orange, yellowy sand in the B layer. We have the A layer, B layer, C layer. So it was bright orange sand. It wasn't wetland sand. I mean, it wasn't wetland soils at all. Vegetation, you couldn't really tell, but the soils didn't make it at all. That's why we took that off, because it doesn't meet the soil requirements. And again, it has to have all three of those parameters. Can't have two. It has to have all three: soils, plants, and hydrology.
So when you looked at the delineation of that upper area, did you use the standard configuration?
So which
in terms of
area?
plots, or, where there was standing water?
Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead. Just want to make sure.
Yeah, I mean, did you use a standard configuration or did you use, a configuration, it's a very small wetland.
No, I know. What do you mean in terms of configuration?
Well, the
Diameters?
plots,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Why they do this, I don't know. The English and the Europeans happy, I guess, but it's 3 meters, 3-meter data plot from the center of your plot for herbaceous, and then for shrubs it goes to 15 feet, and then for trees it goes to 30 feet. So it goes from metric to standard. I don't know why, but that's Army Corps, and that's the way they do it.
5 feet, they usually
Yeah,
say.
but yes, but for some reason in the rules, this is in the Corps manual, 3 meters, and then it's 15 feet and 30 feet.
Being
Yeah.
more than 9 feet.
Yep. But so, yes, I used the standard. And I did that right in the center of that low area where it was wet, because that's where it's wet. So that's where you look.
But I guess the
And then
thing
I
is
moved around in that draw.
that I would say if it's such a small area, you're going to get a majority of
Yep.
upland plants.
Yeah, and
around
even in
it.
the summertime, when there was more herbaceous plants there, it was full of upland plants. Canadian Mayflower, which is an upland, very small herbaceous plant, was in there. A lot of teaberry. It's in my report, but yeah, there was.
Yeah, I know, because I noticed there was a red maple.
There's a couple little red maples there, one
And
or two high
and
bush
also
blueberry.
there is as you know, there's a methodology for looking at hydrophytic vegetation
Yes.
when they're,
Yep.
it's factored.
Yeah, and it's interesting because usually with hemlock we do that. when it's a FAC up, which is an upland species, but it's in more of a soggy environment. We take a bunch of those indicators out in different plants and all that stuff, and then look at the wetland plants. But for here, there were so few wetland indicator plants and so many upland plants all around it. I felt that the ratio wasn't there.
Anybody else on board get questions on the? What?
What was, on a slightly, the other topic that Amy, you had mentioned was, the NHB letter, what were the species of concern that were identified?
So Landing's turtle, eastern hognose snake, north black racer, and the woods turtle as a species of concern.
What's the last turtle?
Wood turtle.
Wood turtle.
And again, not on the property as a site,
Right,
but
yeah, but
surrounding.
you know,
river.
they travel. Mhm.
So we're on public hearing.
Yeah, if any, unless the board, does anybody got any more questions on any of this? All right, then we're gonna open this to the public. Sure. Right.
Share together.
Constraints.
We have a new
I would get too close to this guy.
we have a new grandson, and so he's a factor.
This way.
So good evening, everybody. I'm Tom O'Donovan. Many of us met last month when I came by as from the Drinking Water Protection Committee to talk about salt contamination in the aquifer area. Tonight, I'm representing the Conservation Commission. Just to remind those who never get a chance to get introduced, I'm retired Army Corps of Engineers. I worked on major construction and infrastructure projects worldwide. I also served in the regulatory area of the Corps of Engineers. I'm a graduate of the Commander's Regulatory Management course, Water Resources Management course. I've also worked in industry and construction industry, specifically in transmission line construction, working construction and regulatory issues. And then I was a first responder to Hurricane Maria after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, and learned a lot about wetlands there also. I was also, I'm now on the Conservation Commission, and I was asked to speak for the Conservation Commission tonight because Sandy, of course, is serving on the planning board tonight, and the other members of the Conservation Commission couldn't make it tonight. So I got the short straw and got asked to speak for them. So I'm not speaking for myself tonight. I'm representing the concerns of the commission itself, many of whom you saw at the site walk. So first, we want to talk a little bit about the importance of buffers overall, because a lot of people have some ideas about buffers that may not be well founded. You know, nationally, historically, when the nation decided to begin to focus on wetlands protection significantly in the 70s and 80s, there was this idea of you could just circle something like on a golf course, call it a wetland, and cut the grass and pesticides and fertilizer right up to the edge of the wetland. And over the ensuing years, we found out that what you end up when you do that is you end up with an algae and cyanobacteria, mosquito-infested mud hole. It is biologically inactive. And so the nation began to consider putting buffers around to protect wetlands to ensure their ecological and biological viability. Over time, that grew into New Hampshire's rules on buffers. They're with us today. But it's important to understand that the buffer that you're talking about today, that line drawn around it, are not the minimum distances required to ensure the biological integrity of that wetland. Rather, they're the political result of a compromise between landowner rights in New Hampshire and the need to protect a critical public resource in water. So the discussions about what is a landowner right and what is needed for protection of public resource have already been worked out. The legislature, the governor, and the courts have already all determined that, and those numbers, as Luke has reflected, which change depending on the size of the wetland, the type of the wetlands, other things like that, have already all been determined. So it's not really the planning board or other organizations' responsibility to determine whether a landowner's rights have been impacted or not. I just want to make sure that you understand that key point. So So with that background on what buffers are about, the Conservation Commission wants to raise 3 points with you: public interest, precedent, and personal responsibility. So first, let's talk about public interest for these wetlands specifically. And I understand, Amy, that your discussion about what parts are still being impacted, we're talking something like 3,000 square feet in this corner area up here. Okay, so just make sure we're all talking about the same thing. So the public values of these wetlands that we're still concerned about in their buffers has been established in law, specifically New Hampshire RSA 482AA, and include flood control, water quality improvement, groundwater recharge, habitat for wildlife, and economic benefits. There are others, but those are the ones that impact this area that we're talking about tonight. For these wetlands here, these roles are very important, must be protected for the public. For example, in wetlands, healthy wetlands, biologically active wetlands, reduce mosquitoes and resist invasive species. Impacted wetlands do not. Noting that I-93, this corridor right here and the transmission corridor right next to it, are already well-established corridors for invasive species, including, for example, the emerald ash borer, which many of you may be familiar with, which has effectively now killed off all the ash trees in New Hampshire south of Lake Winnipesaukee, and it's working its way north up the highway corridors, is a good example of that. Similarly, mosquito-borne illnesses such as West Nile Valley fever, Eastern equine encephalitis virus, EEE, are making their way up these corridors also into Bow and the areas beyond. Second, groundwater contamination. Last time we were together, and Don, you weren't here for that, and I hope you get a chance to read the minutes of it. If you have any questions, by the way, give me a shout, and Cindy and I'd be happy to take those on. But we talked a little bit last month about the ongoing and increasing groundwater contamination due to salt use in Bow's groundwater aquifer. Suffice it to say that a wetland's ability to provide clean water infiltration to our aquifer is far better than stormwater runoff taking the water away as surface flow. The second area the Conservation Commission wants your to take to your consideration is in precedent. While the legislature has given you the responsibility for limited exceptions to some requirements at the state level, that responsibility is founded on public interest. For example, exemptions for schools or hospitals or for truly minimal impacts. Given that, the impact the applicant here is requesting, which represents less than 1% of the acreage of the lot, in other words, of this total lot size, they're asking for 0.09% impact, is a significant impact for the wetlands. So what is the significant public interest to allow this buffer destruction? Is it increased tax revenue? If so, we need to see the numbers for that indicate to us that the increased tax revenue for Bow is sufficient to have that public impact to our water resources. Is it personal rights to the land? Because we've already talked about how the legislature and the governor and the courts have already determined what is a personal right and what is not a personal right for landowners. And that's already been worked out. Our final point is that if you establish the wetlands buffer as available for industry to impact in significant ways like this at essentially will, you'll set a precedent will bring further destruction to wetlands buffers across Bow. And we're very concerned about that. Finally, personal responsibility. As we've already mentioned, it's not the role of the planning board to determine the owner's property rights versus public interest. Rather, your oath is to uphold the law that established the planning board and the specific requirements of that law for the protection of water resources. And we can go into that some more if you need to. To summarize, we request that the planning board not allow the impact of the wetlands in this northwest corner. We now realize that this is non-jurisdictional, this other area that you've talked about. So we're only talking about this area up here. And we appreciate the opportunity to comment. Look forward to your questions and your decision. Thanks, Don.
I do got a couple questions,
Please.
and I'm not sure. What is the state's buffer requirements? That's what I thought. So when you do say that the state never, has set this, and, which you're very well spoken with, I'm kind of curious because there's zero. So if that's agreements, that you said as we agree that, I know
So
the
what-
towns
so what
have buffers,
buffer are
I
we-
think buffers are an important thing.
A town buffer. Okay, thank you. But the town buffer is established on town ordinance that are based on state RSAs. Okay,
Yes.
that's the connection. Thank you for that.
Just to
Yep,
kind
I
of
appreciate that.
clear that up. One of my other big questions with, because I don't know much about wetlands. I know, surface water is going to flow downhill. I know that. this buffer is for, the wetland is on the other side of where they're gonna make a 30-foot cut. How does that play into the hydrology of protecting, for your pesticides, the buffer is so things aren't running into the wetland, it's to protect that wetland. Well, when you have what does that do with that buffer when it's 30 feet lower?
So that's a great question, Don, and we discussed that in the Conservation Commission. You can see the drawing that we used to discuss it directly on the board behind you. It's a
Okay.
little cryptic. So you see the top
Yeah.
line is the original land layer, and then you see the cut that's down there, and our concerns with groundwater withdrawal affecting wetlands.
Yeah.
Because you can kill a wetland by cutting off surface water, but you can also kill a wetland by cutting the ground and drain the water
And
from it,
basically the water can be drained out.
and the water drains out underneath. In this case, the buffer is a critical part of protecting the groundwater withdrawal piece underneath. Now, where does the groundwater flow? As we talked about last time, if you think New Hampshire politics are complicated, try looking at groundwater flow in New Hampshire. All right. But what we do know is a 35 foot cut is going to have some kind of impact. All right. There's just no way it couldn't.
There's gonna be some water running out of that wall at some point.
Exactly right.
Like
And
you
it's
see
just
that on the interstates.
mere feet to the wetland is going to have some kind of impact. And that's what we would seek to avoid. Thank you.
So-
Thank you for that.
So I guess, and with that, I mean, I could understand how it could drain that wetland and work on, not being so wet then. How would that affect, the mosquito piece, which that's the scarier part of the, what you're talking about in the disease. I mean, once we, if making this cut in the buffer is gonna reduce the wetland because you're gonna drain it, right? I mean, you still have the soils, but I imagine those soils change over time as other things has, what does that do on, the mosquito piece? I mean, I'm surprised to hear that pesticides running into a wetland, which I don't think is a good thing, it seems like that would keep the mosquito population down some. But
Okay, well, first of all, the pesticide example I'm talking about is wetlands in golf courses are
Yeah.
impacted by that
Okay.
sort of application. But wetlands are impacted by pesticides. But pesticides kill a lot more than bugs. They also can kill the bugs, which then the things that eat the bugs starve to death and die. Or the pesticides can kill the
Yes.
things that eat the bugs. The bottom line is really very simple. A healthy wetland has a lot of things in it that eat mosquitoes. An unhealthy wetland has springtime water that allows mosquitoes to breed and does not have the animals that eat, or animals or other things that eat the mosquitoes. That's the essential linkage. So an unhealthy wetland tends to have a higher population of mosquitoes than a healthy wetland.
okay.
So what is the Conservation Commission's proposal to just move the whole site? Like what, in your ideal situation, what would be the outcome?
I mean, I'm sure I'm a previously registered professional engineer, and Amy is a registered professional engineer. So I'm sure at some point they had discussions about this, about how would we lay the site out if we were not able to get the buffer exemption. So you need to ask them that, what it would look like. Our point of view on the Conservation Commission is, look, Tom O'Donovan, am never going to be an Olympic gymnast. Okay, I'm just not. It's not going to physically happen. If this site, if the requirement of not impacting the buffers and the way it's proposed changes something fundamental about how the site can be used, so be it. I mean, that's compliance with the law, and that's what the site can handle.
So I got another question because of this big cut in here. And I'm not sure how many feet exactly it was, but if they moved out to, brought this cut further out, so it was at the edge of the buffer line and cut down 30 feet, I would imagine you'd have about the same impact to the water on the
Yeah,
top of
I
the hill.
have some thoughts and comments on it too, on the groundwater and everything else. So I don't know when
Yeah, I mean, this is a
this is an
discussion
open
about,
discussion.
yeah,
Okay, so
I mean, that's how I.
yeah, no.
like-
So and bear with me. So as you can see on the plan, if we look at that wetland curve, if you don't mind, yeah, we're all the way over to the left-hand side. You can see that wetland on the, we're just going to call it the left-hand side of the plan. It's on a slope. That is all ledge underneath there. If you walk the parallel lines, you see it.
Yep.
There's exposed ledge. So that wetland, it's not getting its hydrology from groundwater because there might be springs seeping up through the ledge, but it's mostly just water coming from the 93 side, and water's just draining down. So the water, the input of water, let's say, to that wetland isn't like lower areas where you've got the groundwater comes up. And when the groundwater comes up, when it's really high, like last year, you've got puddles, and then all your wetland plants grow and everything else happens. Here, the water is actually it's draining off the surface, and it's wettest on the left-hand side of the plant, on the property line, and on the left-hand side of the utility easement. That's where all the vegetation is. Between the power line easement and the property line, most of the vegetation is down, I'm using my hands, on the left-hand side and comes down to the bottom of the property line, almost making almost like a hatchet, I guess. That's where most of the moisture is coming down the left-hand side of that. There is some seepage and drainage coming down the ledge underneath the power line easement, but there's not a lot of water influence coming into that from anything. It's draining from upper areas. You're kind of the top of the hill right there anyway, but that's where the water is coming from. It's coming from the left-hand western side of the plan, and then going down to the bottom and then going off site. It's all draining down. So yes, is there always a risk of that when you cut into a slope? Yeah, there could be some water that comes out, but I don't think there's a lot of ground water in that ledge. I mean, I don't know how deep that ledge is. I don't know how far it goes. There's a lot of ledge there though. So my guess is it's probably pretty deep. So there's always the risk when you cut into a face of water is going to seep out. But it's not so much where it's a pond at the top that's just sitting, and if we cut that ledge, it's going to suck all the water out. If that makes sense. You can picture that. Because the water is draining down the left-hand side, they're going to cut in as proposed, and there may be some water that comes out. You can't guarantee it. You don't know either way. But most of the water is coming down the left-hand side of that and going through. That's my rationale on that. The other aspect of the fact that they are cutting in, and I agree, wetland buffers are important. I'm not negating that at all. But by cutting into the site, you're right, because the wetlands up here,
Yeah.
they're going to cut down. So there won't be any threat of runoff going to it. A lot of times you see with a flat site, and they're going to develop it, they're going to raise the site up, and now the wetlands are even lower. And granted, the stormwater is always going to go to the lowest point. Like here, they're designing it as such. But with the flat site and they raise it up, then there's a threat of something not working right. And pesticides, runoff, salt, snow, whatever they end up doing on a site has a threat to get in there. But here, because they're cutting it down, you are reducing the buffer, and the buffers are important for getting that additional water and kind of cleaning it up before it gets to the wetland. But here, by cutting it in, you don't have that threat. You are going to have less of a buffer, but there's no.
Things from the site.
Yeah, as I say, I'm not trying to negate the importance of the buffer, but there's not going to be, because we're asking for less, we're not going to have less of protection of that area because we have no runoff going to that we physically can't because it's going to be cut in. And all that water is coming down to the front, if that makes sense. Just wanted those two
John,
points.
You know, they made this point at the previous discussion also that the way they're going to do the cut won't result in runoff going into the wetland. And that could be true.
Yeah, I mean,
But
I know
treating the-
water,
Yeah.
you know, once it's on the surface anyways, flows downhill.
Well, the Corps has a saying for that, you know, water flows uphill towards money. And so you gotta remember that it's not always quite that simple. So
That's why I say on the surface.
we can't treat the ledge, you know, the point that he just made about, you know, we're cutting into the ledge on the other side from where the wetland is, and we treat the ledge as if it's one monolithic thing. I mean, anyone who's ever done any rock work in New Hampshire knows the minute you open up ledge, it's faulted, it's cracked, it's broken, and water flows through it in whatever direction it's going to go. So we do remain concerned that with a 35-foot cut, you're taking the legs out from underneath that wetland, and it's going to drain from below. We would like to see a stepped project site and reduce that cut to something reasonable, avoid the buffer impact, and not have a 35-foot cut to do that. But we assume that with the value of gravel and other things he's going to pull out of there, that's not economically feasible. What we can legally stand on is, please don't impact the wetland buffer. That part we can get to. If they want to step the site, reduce the cut, reduce the impacts even further, I think that'd be fantastic. But I don't think they'd be willing to do that.
So, I mean, I guess as you went through your piece, I mean, one of the other, you know, parts of it that you say, the financial side of it and what, you know, which you can look at a bunch of numbers, but I mean, Bo's commercial area is between 3A and the river, which is the watershed. correct? So pretty much everything that we do
Is the aquifer.
is you have aquifer, you have, we get into that. And I think our commercial area that, for the most part, we want to try to get as much commercial as we can because it's much better for the tax base. I mean, this is the type of, the 50,000 square foot of building in there, it will definitely be a tax positive. When we're doing these projects on the other side of the interstate and this residential pieces, that's not so much of a tax positive, because they have kids in school. And that's part of my, as you say, the financial part, that's my thought
Right.
on that.
But we, the part that I'm having difficulty getting my mind around is it appears that they said, we can't make this site economically viable if we don't get the 3,000 square feet of buffer impact. But the 3,000 square feet of buffer impact is really a very minimal impact on the wetlands. Well, which is it? Is it minimal or is it a major impact to the site if they don't get it? You can't really have it both ways. So again, we would just prefer that they not put the impact on the buffer and build the site the way that they'd like.
When a site was approved here many years ago, that cut was a little further back, I'm pretty sure. We have
Further back meaning,
towards the power lines getting into, because I know this time they had said about not wanting to get into the power line right away and deal, because PSNH's or Eversource, whoever was the power lines, are not wanting because they're looking at growing the power lines. I'm pretty sure the engineer on the site during the site walk had talked about that. So,
The plans from 2007 and granted wetlands are different.
Yep.
It's changed. But that plan did show being closer to the wetland at the time, the wetland delineation at the time. It also showed the ledge face at the PSNH easement and cutting into the PSNH easement. So yes, it was a bigger footprint that would be flat. But we recognize that cutting into a PSNH easement would not be allowed.
So I have two questions, one for both sides. So Tom, we like much of what I've learned, all of what I've learned about wetlands is from you. That's it. We grant CUPs all the time. Why is this one bothering you so much?
Can I say something?
No, I want to hear.
You want him to answer? Okay.
the challenges of the 93 corridor.
Okay.
And I've been involved in the 93 corridor when I was with the DES as the Water Division Director, because I had to sign the water quality certifications for the 93 corridor. So the 93 corridor and its part in Bow is of increasing concern for water quality, specifically salt contamination, and then its parallel 3A area, as we talked about last month. And because of this invasive species movement up and down, essentially up the corridor. And the fact that this is occurring right on the edge of the zoned boundary. And as you know, we have a saying in the military, bad things always happen at the boundaries between units, because that's where bad things happen. Yeah. And so in this particular area, if we were talking about something deep inside the area where we already have highly impacted areas where we've been digging sand out of there for years and years and years, that kind of thing, that'd be one thing. But we're right on the edge of this particular application is right on the edge of the area that makes it a higher concern. Sandy?
Okay.
Well, I guess my concern is that I don't think each project is different, because it's to what extent can the use be accommodated in a slightly different configuration or whatever.
I think that's my next question I want to ask you.
And I think that this is one that they could minimize. They haven't minimized the impacts to the buffer, and they could, given the type of structures they're building and such.
So my question for the applicant, so I have not built like anything like this, but I've run many businesses in my life. And if I wasn't here at the last meeting, but if we're saying that this isn't economically viable without that, You've got
That
your-
is Tom's words. Those are not my words.
okay, because that's not a good business plan. You need so why wouldn't you just build it without impacting the buffer, given the size of the whole thing, given the business? I'm questioning why you need that one corner to make this a feasible plan.
And so primarily related to the way circulation works around the site, the way that we're trying to accommodate the layout of having access doors on the back of each building, and in order to get in and around like the large WB-40s vehicles and emergency vehicles, all of those pieces kind of play into how this layout came to be. And we feel like we did make steps to reduce the buffer from the original layout to bring it in so that we weren't impacting as much buffer as possible.
What would happen if you cut out the two or three left-hand bays? You wouldn't be within the buffer there.
Right. So
Why would you not? I'm not question again. I don't build warehouses, but why would you not just say, okay, we don't need those 3 bays. Obviously, we're down a bit of money. We're down profit, but we still have a massive facility here.
yep. So if we were to look at reducing those 2 bays to take that corner out, we're also taking away from the lower building too. So this whole thing is going to need to shift in quite a bit in order to fully be outside of that buffer.
So you're just saying you don't want to take off 4 bays, so you don't have to have a CUP. Is that true?
Generally speaking, it's everything coming in. So it's not just the bays, it's the depth of the buildings, because we have some very small impacts on that north side too. So I think it's what would be,
Would you have to take out the bays if you just remove the backside driveway? Or are you looking at having access?
we would
that-
need
If
to
you need-
provide access around the
You have to
building.
have
Have access around that?
For safety reasons, for emergency vehicles, but also for accessibility for the large vehicles to come around and be able to access those overhead doors on the backside.
So is the concern with the buffer here mostly that we're gonna undercut the wetland and it's gonna drain through is that the primary concern here?
Well, I think that is one concern. I just think that we have buffers for a reason. And, I don't think that this plan has minimized the impact to the buffers as our ordinance indicates is required.
I think it would be helpful to frame the conversation around the CUP criteria.
Right. What has
So basically, the ordinance says you have to have buffers of certain size for certain types of wetlands. But the ordinance has also created a process for a conditional use permit that says, in these scenarios, you can get a reduction of those buffers. And it clearly lays out what those criteria are. And so I think if you go through the criteria one by one, it'll help you come to a conclusion as to whether or not we've been met. So in the CUP part of the packet, we have their response to the Article 10.01F criteria.
Somewhere in there.
Is that your CUP then?
Yeah. the CUP one. One more?
So I think if somebody wants to go through those, I don't know, John, so you want to lead the group through those, or if you want me to.
Sure, cool.
Okay, so the first one really jumps right into the main question, I think, is proposed activity minimizes the degradation to or loss of buffers, minimizes any adverse impact to the functions and values. And so,
Which we don't have the assessment.
we have it. We probably don't have it in front of us right now, but we do.
Yeah, I don't.
It does
Yeah, I
exist.
didn't get the digital copy because
I don't know what part of this you want to see.
Let's see.
I don't know what part of it would be helpful for you, Sandy's, a lot of pages.
right, and it's not, and then you have to figure out which ones go with which wetland.
Yeah. So, I mean, having Luke as a resource might be helpful, but I mean, the point of that criteria is that the impact specifically minimizes the specific functions and values that wetland provides.
Well, it also says minimizes degradation to or loss of wetland buffers. So,
And so the applicant's response is that they've been minimized to the maximum extent practicable. I guess it's up to the board to decide if
They have or not.
if that's the case. And then the next one is that the activity minimizes the environmental impact to abutting or downstream properties, other wetland resources. C, I think, is
Yeah,
key one.
yeah.
So the proposed activity or use cannot practically be located otherwise on the site to eliminate or reduce the impact to the wetland impact resources. So I think that's the key question.
Yeah.
Is could things be shifted?
Question is, could have been shifted.
Yeah, so the proposed activity or use cannot practicably be located otherwise on the site to eliminate or reduce the impact to the resources. I think it's also important to ask, so the buffer is important and so we've decided that it's a 50-foot buffer. It's just, sure there's some science behind it, but it is a somewhat arbitrary number. I think maybe a question for Luke is if this were shifted back, so it's at that 50-foot line instead of the impacts it makes into the buffer, how does that change the impacts to the wetland if we shifted it back right onto the wetland buffer line?
So actually up, if you shifted it up,
Well, so let's say in an imaginary world that your impacts end right at the buffer
right
line.
at the edge of the buffer.
Yeah, how different are the
And
impacts to the wetland?
just for reference, the
Sure.
buffer would be 23 feet to the top of the ledge base.
So if they were to pull it all back
Yep.
and grade it so it followed the edge of the buffer,
Or just, so it's all out of the buffer?
or right at the edge.
Yeah, so if this was cut
Yep.
back, so basically where our red solid line is, that was the top of the cut.
What's the difference to the impacts to the wetland?
I don't think there would be one. Honestly, because it's the same thing. Are they cutting into a ledge face? Yes. May it pull some water out of it? Possibly. Nobody knows. As I say, the drain, I'm not going to get into it all again, but the drainage is coming down the left-hand side. It's not coming from the right where the edge of the proposed development is. Same thing also, it's going to be cut down. It's not just being cut on the western side, it's being cut on all sides. So there is no water running off to any of that, as we mentioned before. So even if they were to come in with a site plan approval, I don't know the terms, but they didn't need a CUP. It would be the same thing. There still would be no threat of anything washing off into it because it's being cut into it and on all sides. So even if it were stepped, there's no way that the water can flow up and get into it. Even through capillary action through the rocks, if it was just fissures, it's still not going to suck that high up and then get up to the top and then drain into the wetlands or even seep that far through the rock. So I don't think there'd be a significant difference at all.
In terms of
either.
water, you're describing in terms of water.
Yeah,
So
in terms of any impact to the wetland itself, if they were at the edge of the 50-foot, if that's what we're talking, person's coming into it, I don't think there would be any difference
Well,
to
you
the
have,
threat of the wetland.
I mean, you have an additional distance that the water can travel that just even within the bedrock or what have you. You also have additional habitat. I
That's
mean,
what I was gonna
yeah,
say,
maybe
but,
it's
yeah.
an additional 27 feet, but it's 27 feet more. It's double what they're providing.
Yeah, and I would imagine that would all be, I would even suggest it, that would all be fenced off at the top anyway. So nothing, so it's not like a lemmings running off the edge. Some sort of,
I think there is
And
a
fencing
fence
that's-
on top of it,
yeah, proposed. Yeah, so nothing can get through and fall down.
just a little bit.
But in
Just to
terms
keep
of
the
then
travel
there's
going up and down,
more
out through.
area for any wildlife to move in and out of the wetlands.
I think
I mean, I think in terms of the groundwater, I think they're having the extra distance that it's not draining out means that it could go it may go in other directions within that additional 27 feet, rather than,
What do you,
being
You're
drained
saying-
out of it.
if that wall is cut,
Closer, there might be more water draining out of it than if it's cut farther away.
the larger issue here is this is absolutely de minimis in terms of the problem of the aquifer and problem of the wetlands. Right? This is a tiny fraction of the problem relative to the salting that is going on in 3A, right? But on the other side, they clearly have not minimized the wetlands impact. You could just make a smaller facility. You're trying to make, and I get it, as a capitalist, you're trying to make the maximum facility you can. And so both sides, I'm a little frustrated. Yes, we can argue about cut and water, but there's such bigger problems in this area than this corner. But on the other side, you're asking us to make an exception when you could just make a smaller, but probably still very profitable enterprise on the space. So
I think that's an excellent summary of the situation, except that I would add, big problems are made of collections of little problems.
no, and I get it. And on the other side, Tom, tax bases are built out of bigger facilities on both sides, and I get it.
But the comparison to the tax increase we could get out of this at maximum economic value compared to the cost we're going to pay to treat the salt coming out of the water later is
Well, I think,
zero.
But I think both are just absolutely de minimis in terms of the ultimate
We
impact,
could talk about that sometime.
right? Because
It's just that this also sets a precedent. If you're going to
we've set
let
the
this.
precedent by granting CUPs
Yeah.
almost
No,
every
no,
meeting.
but a lot
Not
of
in
the
the
other
thousands of square
CUPs
feet.
are,
Yeah.
you can't get into the site unless you cross the wetland. So, and this is what happens definitely with all our residential stuff. And even some of the.
and that's where the
commercial.
residential is.
Right,
It-
but so you cross the wetland, but then you're going to,
And Sandy, I'm agreeing with you.
right,
My instinct is go away, design it so it doesn't have an impact on the wetlands, and come back. That is my instinct. I look at the size of this thing, and I think that you can go away and make a very profitable business without cutting into the wetland buffer. That's where I stand. I know we can go back and forth all night about this, but that is
can't.
where I stand. I'm
Tom definitely can.
I'm not
He's
really
a well-spoken one.
I'm not really sympathetic to either side in the sense that we have such bigger problems than this when it comes to the wetlands. But I just think that you could try a little harder to make it fit and make it really good business without getting into the wetland buffer. I don't need to say any more. That's where I stand.
you agree?
So
So I would,
I guess, I mean, the one thing I do question with that,
Is this still the public hearing or not?
do I want to shut Tom up?
Asking, that's
I'm-
Got a
I will
grandkid at home
close
he
the
wants to
public
go
hearing.
see, so,
If we need you, we'll definitely call you back up.
thank you, Don, I appreciate that.
You know, I guess, you know, and maybe they can say, oh, we can cut a couple days off, make shift, pretty easy work. You know, what part of that tells me is, you know, somebody coming in that wants to encroach on wetlands, you know, they should have wanted, you know, if they wanted to take the whole buffer and the next time, you know, well, we rework this, now we're only taking half of it, is that gonna be? You know, what did they do? I know, and that's why I brought up, I know the first time this came in, and I think some of what slowed it down was the town was so worried about access to their piece of property over here they want to develop. And I don't know why it didn't end up happening the first time. I was sitting in the seats over there. But I know, you know, this did come back, which in part of it's because they know PSNH is gonna say no, so. And where it's a cut, where it's the, you know, if they were piling up and it's gonna send more down into, well, I would get it. Here, I don't quite see the concern myself, but I mean, I guess some of it is with the applicant is, you know, whether you want to say, you know, maybe we should do this, you know, and withdraw yourself, or if we put it to a vote and you see if it gets denied.
I was gonna ask, I'm gonna make a motion. Do you want to withdraw it or do you want me to make a motion?
I need to consult with the applicant.
Okay, that's fine.
I mean, so just to be clear about the options, so. No, so they know. what they're
The
saying.
rules, guys.
Was your motion gonna be to deny it?
Yes.
Okay, because the other option is to continue and let them rework it and come back without ending it tonight.
You and your rules.
It's trying to give everyone a chance to.
I mean, I'm happier to do it your way.
Okay, 'cause-
We're also happier to
So-
do the rational thing and let you continue it.
So just to be clear, the options are,
Well, I should
the
say-
planning board can make a decision yay or nay right now. You can withdraw the application, or you can ask to continue it and rework it and come back with another revised plan.
So can the board vote solely on the CUP? We would like the board to vote on the CUP for the wetland buffer reduction.
I'll make a motion to deny the CUP on the wetlands buffer on application 409-24.
I'll second.
All those in favor of denying the application?
The CUP.
The CUP?
The application.
The C,
Aye.
Aye.
all those opposed to denying the CUP? Aye,
Split vote, we never have these, Tom.
I know.
Keep it interesting. Okay.
Sorry, I was jotting down notes.
You vote?
I'm gonna vote no.
You're
Voting.
voting,
No.
you're voting with Don.
No.
I'm voting no.
Okay.
Okay, Don and Adam are opposed, and then, sorry, the alternates voting. 1, 2, 3.
Oh,
I'll take it.
I don't know the alternates.
actually, there is two alternates that we didn't need, and I did say
Don't
before.
think it makes. a
I
difference.
normally.
I
have
just
them
want to
vote, so
record, I just
We'll
want
we'll have them still voting, because normally
to,
I.
so it's 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, there's 8 of you. Okay, got it, thanks.
Should have worked on that at the beginning of the meeting.
It's okay.
And then do you want us to continue the other application? Okay, I'll make a motion to continue application 211-24. The site plan application for Chirica Properties. Sorry.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Okay,
Now, when do you want to come back?
hold on, before we get too far,
Okay.
for the denial of the CUP, we need to document findings of fact for that.
Finding of facts on my end is that they just did not minimize the wetland buffer impact.
Yeah, I can't remember which. As required. Yeah, as required in the CUP. I think it's A and C.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's really your B?
All right, so they didn't meet the criteria.
Okay,
There we go.
all right. Thank you.
Do we need to set a date on?
So the next meeting is January 2nd.
16th would be the,
16th. Oh, for the-
would be real impressive.
January 16th was the next meeting. Do you want to do that, or do you want
what's
to?
that? Yes. For what? For the-
For some reason that is not working as far as getting something together appropriately, then I'll ask for a continuance. Is that okay?
All right, so be clear, if any letters are following along from home, then it'll be continued to January
January 9th,
16th. Six-
December. What's January?
16th.
16th.
You have a meeting on the 2nd, but that's for just. Got it.
Yes.
I was also ready.
No, I know. In my head, I'm like, when am I here next? The second. But no.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you in a month.
Minutes?
It appears that.
Just so I'm clear, the only thing that we're talking about is that one corner. Is everything else on that plan fine
Yeah, do you want to discuss,
regarding the wetlands?
is there anything else you want to talk about with the site plan?
I mean, this is a great time to.
The entirety of the red line that kind of bubbled out halfway down too. It's not just.
So it seems
There's
like
a
we
couple
only
of-
talked about wetlands, but are you asking the board to give feedback on the rest of the site plan?
Well, yeah, if we're gonna redesign anything, I'd rather only have them do it once and not keep coming back and doing
That's
this.
a great
It's a
point.
fair.
Yeah. So do we want to actually just come back into it to make sure we
I think you should. I think that's fair.
go? We're not continuing the meeting yet. We'll revote on that. And right now, we're just going to be talking about the application and not the CUP.
All right, so we can run through some stuff quickly. So as far
Well,
as,
maybe actually first, like there were other wetland buffer impacts on there too, weren't there?
not anymore.
No,
So
it's on the,
these two, and then the ones on the side.
Right, there was the one where it bumped out on the side, and there were the other two on the, to the right up at the top.
Yeah,
can
these
you pull that map back up?
Yeah,
Craig?
yeah.
It's easier to see on your screen than on a non-colored.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so there's these two small ones at the top and this along the side and here on the side. Those are the only buffer impacts proposed currently. The other ones that were previously noted down here, this one, this wetland is now smaller than originally thought, so it has only a 30-foot buffer. These are no longer buffer impacts. This is not classified as a wetland, so these buffer impacts are no longer.
correct.
It's only the one on the 93 side?
Yeah, so there's across the top, there's a few areas here, here, and around the corner and down the side.
Are we opening it for our discussion?
Yes.
So I would be less worried about those on the top,
Yeah.
but more concerned about that on that back corner. And if you address that corner, you're probably gonna address
Yeah.
the side by default, right? If you pull that corner in, you're probably gonna pull in the driveway slightly, so. Does that,
There's a material difference between 15 square feet, 185 square feet, and 2,000 plus square feet. I think we're not dogmatic, we're gonna be reasonable about that. I think that you have a problem with that size.
The back corner.
We're not gonna put something over 15 square feet of wetland buffer. I'm speaking for myself off the board, but
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
So as far as, there is the two waiver requests. One's for the certification of a surveyor because they were relying on a plan. And then the second waiver was for the monument on the back side of the property where it slightly exceeds the 500 feet. So how
I
do you
think
feel about the waivers?
93 keeps
It's a
that.
pretty good-
It's a pretty good marker.
yeah. Yeah, I have no.
Yeah.
No problems with those.
Okay, those both sound reasonable to me as well, but, what else do I want to talk about? We talked last time about the location of the yard hydrant. You were gonna try to address that. Okay.
For the what?
The yard, the
hydrant.
fire hydrant, the fire chief didn't like the access he could get
Too-
from there, so.
too
it's
close
Too
to-
close to the buildings. He'd be melting if he tried to use it.
That's probably a pretty easy thing to
Yes.
to move on in.
See what else we had. As far I don't know if you all had a chance to look at the third-party engineering letter. He commented on the complexity of the drainage. He spent a lot more time on the review than he intended to. But, so there are a few things that he just felt needed to be clarified in the plans, mostly because of its complexity, so that somebody else reading it would be able to figure out what was going on. But I don't believe you identified any like major issues, and are there any of the items in the review letter you wanted to address specifically?
The only one was the restoration bond, the other ones
Yeah.
I've worked through on my end.
So do you
And
want,
the restoration bond.
yeah, so do you want to talk about the restoration bond? So the amount that was proposed by the applicant was it
340,
Well, what you proposed first was
57.
57,000, and our town's engineer came up with 340,000. So there's a huge discrepancy there.
So, I mean, the registration bond would come in, they start excavating out of here and stop at some point. We got a whole bunch of exposed ledge. What is restoring it?
It's
You're not gonna
more
put the ledge back.
stabilizing the site and putting loam and seed down. That's the extent of it.
You wouldn't loam and seed over like rock. I don't understand. It's all, if you're blasting it out, like you're not,
Yeah, you,
you know what I mean?
what's it take to?
Like rock is already stabilized, isn't it?
Well, I guess the question is, what's restoration? Is it,
Yeah,
so someone could use it thereafter, or is it that it's stable? Yeah.
I guess it was, I mean, normally, yeah, it's so they're stable, not blowing sand everywhere, or washing out, or
Right.
creating a bigger problem, which, I mean, it's gonna be,
Yeah, I don't
it's
think,
rock.
yeah, that's,
So I mean, the 340,000 sounds pretty high.
But like if
Would
if
you come
you-
up with 57?
Can you address what, so it wasn't just the unit prices that created that difference, it was the amounts or the scope of what the restoration entails?
So
What was
the
different?
scope included loam, seed, fertilizer, and mulch. Mulch was 140,000, I think. Is that right?
Yes.
And that I heard that earlier today. Yeah, so it just seemed like an aggressive amount.
maybe some of it be, I mean, maybe some of it you would have to stabilize with loam and seed, but I mean, I guess it just sort of depends on where you are in the rock removal process, but I don't know, to me, that seems like, what, do you have an idea of what percentage of the site this, the loaming and mulching?
I think he used 200
$14,000 in seed?
cubic, 200,000 cubic feet. It was, but he did include an area, and I think it was square yards. And I think it was the entire site that was flat.
Cause he has less than what you have in yours, but your price is $5 and his is $48.
Well, so wait, so the loam, you have it in square feet and he has it in cubic yards.
Ah, that's a difference.
So we can't really compare those very easily.
No, good
Not
point.
the unit price, right?
Good point, sorry.
Why would they have to excavate? I guess just to clean, just for cleaning up, I guess.
So there is a detention pond, or like a detention depression area. I think that's what he was counting as the excavation. So I looked at that too and thought, well, that's the whole project is excavation.
For
to get-
restoration.
Yeah.
So when I did the restoration cost, yes, my cost of the loan.
Yeah, just give you a name just so it's on. the-
David White. So when I put together that price, we assumed the loan was on site. So all we were gonna do was take the loan that was on site and then respread it. So there's a huge difference in cost between importing screen loan and just spreading on-site loan. I also was unsure about, it was my assumption that rock was a stabilization or a restoration product, which the whole site is gonna be covered with. So we didn't necessarily have the whole thing. The mulch number I'm completely thrown by. The total cost for mulch, if we hydroseeded it, the mulch that would be added in with the hydroseed would be about $2,800.
We have to resolve this. Not that we have to resolve it now, but
I can talk to the town's engineer again and ask him to
can you, yeah,
justify or
Yeah.
let, like,
Yeah.
is this really necessary? The board felt like it sounded like a lot.
Yeah.
can you do that?
I definitely can do that.
Okay.
I think that you should assume that at least some of it is gonna be rock.
Rock.
I think it's all gonna be,
Yeah.
everything within after the first 50 feet. I think that's all rock all the way back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what we were walking on out there.
There's a lot of rock.
It's not gonna be sand once you go down 10 feet
10 feet, that's 6 inches.
or 6 inches, yeah. Anyways,
Any other clarifications?
I also don't understand the 4,000 pounds of fertilizer.
Especially if we want
Making the
to.
ball.
We're gonna
yeah,
have
that would be
groundwater.
horrible for the wetland. We need to think about that. 4,000 pounds of fertilizer.
Yeah, that's what's in there. Seems like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we'd want to let that.
It says,
No, if we're worried about the groundwater.
Tom's not gonna let
So what kind of fertilizer? are you talking about?
Yeah,
We're
true.
gonna put fish oil.
Okay, so he'll clarify that.
I will ask him to clarify or justify,
Yeah,
tone it down, whatever. I don't know.
I think really, what is the town looking for restoration? I mean, if
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's all not going anywhere, but I guess you have to plan.
you
for the
always gotta
worst.
worry about, that, a project starting and
Yep.
that mess being left, so what's it gonna take to clean it up? I don't think it's $340,000 bond to clean it up.
Did our engineer have theirs to review when they?
Yes.
All right, so anything else on the peer review that seemed way out of whack, like that estimate?
I think those were the major points, unless you have any other questions for the board.
Do the minutes thing.
Apparently not. Sorry.
We won't be approving minutes.
We'll do the minutes next time. Going.
So since we reopened this, do we need to
Revote for
revote
continuance.
for continuance?
Sure.
Just to keep it official?
Sure, why not?
okay.
I'll make a motion to continue application 2/11/24 through the property site plan application
To January 16th.
to January 16th.
Second.
All those in favor?
Hi.
See you next one.
You.
No minutes, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
We don't have this other one?
I have a question.
Oh, that's what we need to do a motion to continue that
Okay,
too?
right.
Motion to continue applications 3 and 4.
Oh, yes.
I'll make a motion to continue applications 212-24 Keller Properties and 411-24 Keller Properties to January 16th.
So before I actually call the vote, why, do they have any good reason for?
I just got a phone call this afternoon and said they weren't ready. They were still putting plans together. I was at another meeting with Tim Bernier this afternoon that he was frantically getting stuff ready for, so I'm guessing he got pulled into another emergency project.
Okay. With that, all those in favor?
Hi.
Opposed?
Carrie, I wanted to ask, I had forgot to ask you, I'd sent you language for the stormwater
Yes,
stuff.
I am incorporating that. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we are posting the public hearing for January 2nd. So the notice is going out.
Okay. I didn't know whether anybody, I guess everybody will review it at the same
Yeah,
time.
because we'll have the opportunity to have 2 public hearings. So we make
Oh,
any changes
okay.
at the first and we can catch it up on
Okay.
the second.
Okay.
So,
All right, good.
yeah,
Thank
okay.
you.
But I'll get those materials sent out tomorrow because I have to post it all tomorrow. So.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever been caught off guard so much by a.
We
I'm gonna
still-
make a motion.
All right, so the meeting, we didn't adjourn the meeting yet.
No, we're taking a motion to adjourn.
You got something else for us, Carrie?
I've got nothing. Happy holidays.
Someone's got a second.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We're done. Yes, Merry Christmas, everybody. Happy holidays.
Yes.
Well.
Good stuff.